living life in the sweet spot. A life as sweet as honey. God spoke to Ezekiel. He said, "Son of man, eat this scroll I'm giving to you and fill your stomach with it." So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. Scrolls were made of different things, of papyrus, a paper, kind of paper, or made of leather. And on the scroll at the bottom, as you've just heard from Elizabeth, on both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. Val talked to us last week about the time of Ezekiel. The young people of Israel had been exported out to Babylon, and Ezekiel was with them, and his call and his message was to a people who had suffered the destruction of Jerusalem. They were under control of Babylon, the powers that be. Chapter 1, and thank you, Val, for last week. It was lovely hearing your explanation of that. Ezekiel had an incredible exotic experience of God. A windstorm, sound and light show, 4 flying creatures all over the place, and Graham showed me, he's done a drawing of this, so if you're interested in seeing that, have a chat to him afterwards. He's done a great drawing of it. A voice from the throne of God, and then a brilliant light and a rainbow. And a voice finally coming out of that and speaking personally to Ezekiel. Chapter 2, basically there are 6 words that start with S that describe chapter 2. Stand up. The Spirit of God came into him. I'm sending you to the Israelites. I'm making you stubborn. Speak my words, and then swallow the scroll. I made up that S. It isn't really there to eat the scroll, but I made it into an S. Swallow the scroll. My call to ministry went like this. I was in Melbourne Bible College in my first year, in Armidale, way back when it was back in the original place. I had a sense of call from God to be in full-time service in some capacity. I wasn't quite sure in what direction. I'd had a good deal of involvement in Youth for Christ, and that was a possibility. I had an uncle who was a missionary, and that was a possibility. And of course there was always being a pastor, a minister of a church. And in my first year I was very much saying to God, where do you want me to go? And the ritual at the Bible college was that we were in a room with about 4 or 5 other guys, and the ritual was at 6 o'clock you all woke up, did your ablutions, but then you had a quiet time, and it was the done thing to kneel beside your bed and to have a quiet time for half an hour. On this particular morning, I was doing that, and I came to Ezekiel chapter 2. I probably read Ezekiel chapter 1, I don't remember that, but and wondered what it was all about. But I got to chapter 2, and Ezekiel's call became my call. I'm sending you to the Israelites not to a people of obscure speech. Go now to your own countrymen. And that became a call to me personally. My ministry was to be in Australia. On my knees, beside my bed, this came to me. Ray, I'm sending you to the church in Australia, not to India or to Indonesia or Africa. What's the sweet spot? Living life in the sweet spot. Tasting honey, beautiful and sweet, lovely. Talk about that later. If you're a cricket commentator, you might say when you're describing a batsman as he hits the ball, he hit that in the sweet spot. The sweet spot is where everything comes together. It produces the best possible result with the least amount of effort. You just time it, hit it perfectly, and then over the head of the fieldsman and over to the boundary, and you hit a six, and it just looks as easy as it could possibly be. There's no huge effort. You see sometimes a batsman will huge effort and he'll hit the edge of the bat and it'll sky up and come down, and the fieldsman will catch it. How do you find the sweet spot in life? Over the Christmas holidays, we went to visit my daughter in Bacchus Marsh and her husband, Paul, and he challenged me to a game of golf. And as with these things, two males, there's a bit of competition there, and I'm an old guy of over 80, and he probably thought I wouldn't be so crash hot, and I probably thought that myself as well. And he's a young, virulent, late 50s, early 60s, and yeah, quite a sportsman. So this is a bit of a competition, I guess, in a way. And so we played, and we just did 9 holes, and I didn't do too badly. A couple of shots, you know, scrubbed along the ground and that sort of thing, but we got to the final hole, hole 9, and I just thought, just relax, Ray, just don't put too much effort in, just relax and go for the wood shot off the tee, and I hit it. And the ball just continued to go. It was a beautiful thing to see. I mean, you play golf for those shots when they happen. And it landed on the green, rolled along and landed just a couple of metres away from the hole. Now, that is hitting the ball in the sweet shot. that is getting your timing just beautifully right. You live for those occasions. What I'm talking about this morning is finding that sweet spot as a Christian. Ezekiel found that sweet spot. I was looking around a little bit to see if anyone else talked about finding your sweet spot. And Brigitte, if you can go to the next overhead, thank you. Dan Doverskin had an article which I read, and he talks about if you want to find your sweet spot, you want to make the most of your existence on earth, first of all, locate it. Work out what you're good at. Determine what your strengths are. Find the things that are that you're passionate about, and learn about it. Be totally involved in it. Don't worry about money, that'll screw things up. Just find what you're passionate about. And that was his first point. And then the second thing is step into it. You know, some of us, when we try to do something, we're not very confident. We don't think we're very good. And he's saying, don't hold back. Just look ahead. Don't look backwards. Be bold. Be confident. Pour yourself into it. Be totally involved in it. Like my wood shot on the last hole. And thirdly, he says, stay the course. Continue, persist. And fourthly, he says, battle adversity. Tough things will come along in your life and it'll be difficult times, but just keep on going. So that was his advice for finding the sweet spot in your life. And I think there's a lot of good aspects of that. But in this passage that we're looking at in 2nd Ezekiel, there is a sweet spot if we want to do what God wants for us in our lives. There's a way in which you can find what that sweet spot is and how you can perform. And the first is stand up, the first S. The Lord said to me, Son of man, stand up on your feet and I'll speak to you. I remember when I first became a Christian, committed my life to the Lord, I was working at Repco and went along to Belgrave Heights. It was all in this time of working out what God wanted me to do in my life. This was before going to Bible college that I talked about before. And I was in Belgrave Heights, if you've been there, and hundreds of people and a speaker challenging you as to what you should do in your life as a Christian. I don't remember what the message was or anything about that. But at the end of it, they said anyone who wants to commit themselves, who feel that God is saying to you, commit yourself to full-time service for Him. And I just knew it and just stood up. Son of man, stand on your feet and I'll speak to you. That call of Ezekiel to stand up was my call that day. You know, you can't find your sweet spot if you're just sitting around not doing anything in particular. And the second S is be Spirit-filled. As he spoke, the Spirit came into me and raised me to my feet, and I heard him speaking. Standing up requires strength, requires bravery, it requires courage. It requires forgetting about yourself and thinking of others. It requires a power and a strength beyond ourselves. And that's how God's Spirit plays his part in your life. We might have the impetus to stand up, but it's the Spirit of God that gives us that capacity, that power to stand up and be God's person in this world. You need power, and that power comes from God. 2 Timothy, Paul says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That's where our strength comes from as a Christian person. That's where our strength comes from when we want to serve God. I probably told this story before, but a young pastor in Abbotsford, and we'd had some trouble with a kid being bullied by some unionists that were pretty active around that sort of area. And he lived in a flat in Northcote, and I went to visit him, and while I was there, this union guy came along and started shouting and abusing from outside. So I said to the guy, you know, it's okay, I'll go out and talk to him. And so I went down, the union guy was there, and I was on the steps, just a step or two above him. And the guy said, I want to go up and deal with this guy. And I said, you've got to get through me first. I don't know where that came from. He's a pretty powerful sort of guy, and I was a scrawny young pastor, student pastor, but something within inside of you just gives you those words. And he said, I believe you. And he went off, disappeared. Spirit-filled. Stand up, be Spirit-filled. Invite God to work in your life and through you in what you do. And the third part of finding your sweet spot is this: to be sent by God. That's the third S. Sent means that's apostle, be one who's sent forward. Have an experience of God. Have a strong sense of being touched by God in your life. And that was certainly Ezekiel's experience. My Uncle Wally was a missionary to India and Pune in India. And he tells in his story about his own life of his experience of being called to the missions. He was walking along Cotham Road in Kew, along the road, and he must have been having a quiet time and in the morning sometime and taking this walk along the street. And he was asking God, where do you want me? He knew he needed to go overseas somewhere, but God, where do you want me to go? And as he was walking, and he'd seen a piece of paper on the ground, a bit of cardboard on the ground. And the voice said to him, go and pick the paper up. So he stopped and turned around and walked back and picked up what was a slip of card, and he turned around and it said, Pune. Can you believe that? Pune. Pune, that's what it said. Be sent. Have that sense of call, that clear call from God as to where you want to be. Uncle Wal went to India as a missionary and eventually was involved with Youth for Christ as a missioner in India. The next step is speak. Then he said to me, Son of man, go now to the people of Israel and speak my words to them. You're not being sent to a people of obscure speech and strange language, but to the people of Israel. And of course, for me, that was very real for me when I was on my knees at my bedside, going to speak to people of a strange language. The most effective speaker, prophet that I've seen of recent times in Australia has been Martin Iles, ACL, someone who spoke clearly to Australia's politicians, using the media, bold, straightforward, telling the message of God, speaking to all parties against abortion, against euthanasia, the rights of Christian schools, talking about same-sex marriage, but most of all sharing who Jesus was and how to become a Christian. We are all called by God to speak and to know that sense of call. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to put ourselves out there and be prepared to speak. We fear of our own failure, we fear of our own abilities not being good enough, the fear of criticism, the sense of a high expectation of how we do it, and we oftentimes back out. The fifth S for Ezekiel to find his sweet spot is be stubborn. Be stubborn. But I'll make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hard stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them. They are a rebellious people. Some of the crazy things that Ezekiel is asked to do. To lie on, I think someone mentioned it before, and Brigitta's going to talk about it, to lie on his left side for 390 days, just to show the people of Israel that this is what's going to happen in the future. And then 40 days again on another occasion. To eat a scroll, to make up a clay model of the city of Jerusalem out in public, and then lay a siege to it, and battering rams and so on, and act out a scene. On another occasion, he took out a sword, used it as a barber's razor, and then he used it to cut up the hair. A third inside the city, a picture of the city being burnt. A third of it was the people were going to be struck with the sword, and a third scattered to the winds. They're going to disperse all over the world. Be stubborn. Being a prophet, not an easy game. Being a Christian isn't an easy game. But that's the requirement that God has on our lives. Be stubborn. The 6th S is swallow. Eat the scroll. Then he said to me, Son of man, eat the scroll I'm giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. Eating a scroll, I guess, is symbolic of, yes, God, I'll do this. I'll take this on. I don't know whether you've ever eaten paper. I tried it yesterday, actually. And it kind of, only a little bit. I don't know how Ezekiel got through a whole scroll, to be quite honest. But I tried a little tear-off bit of paper, and it goes into a hard ball in your mouth, and it doesn't dissolve, it just stays there. Yes, Will?
It sticks to the back of heads.
Sorry, that?
It sticks to the back of heads.
I still didn't catch it.
You don't need to.
No, it sticks to the back of your head.
Okay. All right. It doesn't dissolve. It turns bitter in your stomach. It gives you indigestion, a lot of it, I imagine. Psalm 34 says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good." If you taste the Lord, I guess that's true. But it's an act of acceptance. For Ezekiel, this was an act of acceptance. God, I'm willing to do the things that you are asking me to do. When I stood at Belgrave Heights, in the crowd, and it was just me and God, there's this kind of euphoria that just hit me. It's a time which I'll never forget. It just hit me. It just, wow. I tasted some honey yesterday. I took a dip, a teaspoon, and I put it in my mouth. And it tasted so smooth and rich and sweet, so sweet. And then I swallowed it, and there was like this kaboom in your mouth, this explosion in your mouth. Honey, just, there's a power in it. And I know why Ezekiel spoke about being touched by God and the power in the honey. I don't know if you try it when you go home. Honey is smooth, sticky, it's runny. I think I've got a couple of guys who I've staged. Would you like to share your little bit of honey? Now, it's not honey, this is all sugar. So I'm giving you an opportunity to have a lolly and to savour it. This is what it feels like to say yes to God. This is what it feels like to say, God, I'm committing my life to you. So as you have this taste of sugar, if you'd like to give it out, Will, thanks. That hits your mouth. It's not as good as honey. Let me say that. We went all through every shop in Yarra Junction to try and find a lolly that was based on honey. And we couldn't find one, so it has to be sugar. So have a sugar hit on us.
Thank you, Ezekiel.
Open it up and taste it. This is what it's like to be in the sweet spot with God. This is what it tastes like. You can taste it, to be in the right spot with God. To be in the right spot with God, you need to eat the honey, and that means to make a stand for God, be spirit-filled, have a sense of call from God, be stubborn and determined to do what God asks you to do, and speak out for people. But do you know what? We're looking. We did find one thing, one sweet that had some honey in it, and it had honey in it. But do you know what? It was honey and eucalyptus. It was meant for a cold. Honey and eucalyptus. And I thought that's not going to give us the honey taste. All we taste is eucalyptus. But then I was thinking about it overnight and thinking, hey, I should have brought the honey and eucalyptus lolly and given that to you to eat later. Because that's a picture of what I want to say this morning. Probably more than just the honey. You see, there's in the call that came to Ezekiel, there is a dichotomy. Now, dichotomy means a division or contrast between two things that are entirely different. So there was this wonderful euphoric experience of being in the right spot with God. But then he had to eat the scroll, and you know what it says about the scroll? On both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. This sweet, wonderful call from God, and he's meant to speak to the people of Israel, doom, gloom, loss of life, out of the country, years and years of this experience. And it says down in verse 14 of chapter 3, the Spirit took me away, and I went in bitterness and anger in spirit. Do you get now why I said it should be eucalyptus with the honey? I went with the strong hand of the Lord on me. It says, God was driving him to go and to share these words of doom and gloom to people. And you see, the call of God, there's a dichotomy. There's the call, and then the fulfilling it. It's not all going to be sweet. It's not all going to be lovely. There'll be the hard times. There'll be the rough times, the difficult times that you struggle with. There's a choice between two things. Doing what God wants you to do and doing the easy thing. Now, I grew up the middle child. My older brother and my younger sister, Max and Dawn, and I was the go-between. I learned to be an appeaser, I'm a negotiator, and try to bring people together. My brother and sister at times had quite severe arguments. And that's the way I am as a person. That's the way I am as a pastor. You know, I struggle personally if I need to speak directly to somebody about an issue that needs to be spoken, a hard thing to say, I struggle with that. I've learned over the years that I've got to do it. You see, there's the sweet and there's the difficult. There's a hard part to being a pastor, to be a person who's called by God to be a prophet. You can be Mr. Nice guy, but if you're Mr. Nice Guy, you're out of the sweet spot. You've moved out of where God wants you to be. Finding your sweet spot, Brigitte, if we can go to that. And he said to me, Son of man, eat this scroll I'm giving you and fill your stomach with it. So I ate it and tasted as sweet as honey in my mouth. See, there are all these things that to get the sweet spot, just that little spot in the middle, stand up, speak, be sent, be spirit-filled, be stubborn, accept it. We do all those things, but it ain't so easy. And that sweet spot is only found when we commit ourselves to God and do what He has asked us to do. Even though it's hard, even though it's tough, not easy. And certainly that became Ezekiel's experience. I was in this church with Brigitte and our 4 children. And the church was the old church, and it was reversed around. And the pulpit was up there and you came in through here. We're sitting just over there. And I can't remember who was preaching or whatever, but I certainly remember what happened. My youngest little girl was playing up, wriggling and making noise and talking. And I said to her, keep quiet, you're in church. She continued playing around. It happened twice. It might have even happened 3 times. I think, if you do that once more, we're staying at Grandma and Grandpa's place. When we go home to Grandpa's place, you'll get a smack. She started crying. She cried herself to sleep on Brigitte's lap. A little bit later she woke up and her first question was, is my daddy still going to smack me? We went home to Dad's place, Mum's place. And I said, let's go outside. And we went to her bedroom. And I knelt down and talked to her about what she had done. And told her the expectations that I had for her. And I took her hand, smacked her on the back of the hand. She started crying. And so did I. That's the last time that I've smacked a child of mine. That's how it is with God. That's how it is being a prophet. The tough stuff comes with the good stuff. The honey is doing what God wants you to do. My lovely little daughter has grown up into a beautiful, beautiful woman with 4 children of her own. A wonderful nurse. We're just so proud of her. But that only happened because I was prepared to do the tough stuff as well as Big Dad, the fun guy. And that's how it is with God. He loved Israel. And he wanted them to follow him. And he asked them to follow him, but they refused to. He said, you continue doing that, you're going to lose your country. I'll leave the temple. You'll be in a different country. Your children will be killed. The temple will be destroyed. And that was the message that God gave to Ezekiel. And into be in the right spot with God, to taste the honey, you had to have the eucalyptus as well, the tough message, the hard message that would cut through. There's only one thing that I think got Ezekiel through, and it's in the 47th chapter of Ezekiel, and when you go home, read it. I'm going to preach on it at the end of this series. God promised he'd come back. And the temple would be rebuilt. And out of the temple, out of the throne where God was, would flow a little trickle of water. And that water would go down the steps of the throne, out through the corridor, through the porchways and the courtyards, and become a creek, and then turn from a creek into a river. And that river would go throughout the whole world, and the glory and the blessing of God would reach every nation and every people in the world. And Ezekiel knew that, and he knew the hard stuff and the tough stuff had to be gone through in order for ultimately the world to turn to God. My friend, in your life, give your life. We sung those songs, those beautiful songs. And can it be? Give your life unequivocally for God. It's not going to be easy. It isn't easy. Be in the sweet spot with God. Accept your call for ministry. Do the hard stuff, and God will carry you through. And you'll see your world changed. You'll see the life of God come into people. God bless you. Love you heaps, and he does too.